At the family's Secret Santa exchange, I overheard my daughter-in-law whisper to her sister-in-law, "I can't stand that witch anymore. Let's put her in a nursing home." My gift to her knocked her right off her chair. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The Christmas tree lights cast a warm glow across my living room as I balanced a tray of eggnog, making my way toward the kitchen for refills. My annual family Christmas gathering was in full swing. Laughter, holiday music, and the excited chatter of my grandchildren filling the home I'd maintained for 35 years. At 58, these moments were what I lived for. "You're sure you don't need help, Mom?" My son James called from the couch, barely looking up from his phone. "I'm fine, dear," I replied automatically, though my arthritis was flaring up something awful. I never complained. That wasn't who I was. I was almost to the kitchen when I heard them, hushed voices from the hallway that led to the guest bathroom. I paused, not meaning to eavesdrop, but something in the tone made me freeze. "I don't know how much longer I can take it," Margot, my daughter-in-law, whispered to my niece. "I swear, I'm at my breaking point with that old woman." My heart stuttered. They could only be talking about one person. "James doesn't say anything?" my niece asked. "Oh, please," Margot scoffed. "He feels guilty, but he knows she's becoming impossible. I've been researching places. Nice ones, you know? But still." I clutched the tray tighter, my knuckles turning white. "I don't aguento mais essa miguera," Margot continued, slipping into the Portuguese she sometimes used when emotional. "Vamos, mandar ela pro asilo. It's the only solution." I may not speak Portuguese fluently, but I'd picked up enough from her over the years. "We need to send that old hag to a nursing home." The tray suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The woman I'd welcomed into my family, whose wedding I had helped pay for, whose children I babysit twice a week so she could maintain her me time at the spa. She wanted to put me in a home. "What about the house?" my niece asked, her voice dropping even lower. "James is an only child. Once she's settled somewhere, we'll finally have some breathing room. This place is worth at least 700,000. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. They weren't just talking about caring for me, they were planning their inheritance. Planning to move me out so they could move in. I should have confronted them right there. I should have dropped the tray and demanded answers. Instead, I did what I'd always done. I swallowed my pain, straightened my back, and stepped away quietly. Some wounds cut too deep for immediate reaction. 20 minutes later, we gathered around the Christmas tree for our annual Secret Santa exchange. My hands trembled slightly as I watched everyone open their gifts, the forced smile on my face feeling like it might crack my skin. "And lastly," my son announced, "Mom's gift to Margot." I had spent months finding the perfect gift for Margot, a vintage emerald brooch that had belonged to my grandmother. Family legend said it had been given to her by a European aristocrat who fell in love with her in the 1920s. I'd planned to pass it down to my granddaughter eventually, but had decided to give it to Margot as a peace offering after our recent tensions. Now I watched with a strange detachment as Margot unwrapped the small velvet box, her expression shifting from polite interest to shock as she saw what lay inside. "Jody, this is," she gasped, looking up at me with wide eyes. "I can't possibly accept this. It's a family heirloom." "I want you to have it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Your family." Her face flushed, and as she stood up to thank me, she somehow lost her balance, toppling backward and landing hard on the floor, still clutching the box. The room erupted in concerned exclamations, with James rushing to help his wife up. Only I remained seated, watching the chaos unfold with a strange calm. "Are you all right?" James asked, helping Margot back into her chair. Yes, she stammered, her face now crimson. It was such a surprise." Our eyes met across the room, and I saw something I'd never noticed before. Guilt mixed with calculation. She knew what she'd been saying in that hallway, and now she was wondering if I had heard her. I smiled warmly, the perfect picture of a doting mother-in-law oblivious to the plans being made behind her back. "Merry Christmas, dear," I said softly. That night, after everyone had gone and the house fell silent, I sat alone in my kitchen, an untouched cup of tea growing cold before me. Tears finally came, hot and bitter, as I faced the truth. The family I had sacrificed everything for was plotting to discard me like outdated furniture. But as the clock struck midnight, marking the official end of Christmas Day, something inside me hardened. If they thought I was a feeble old woman they could push aside, they were about to learn how very wrong they were. They might be planning my future, but they had no idea what I was planning for theirs. The week after Christmas passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I baked cookies with my grandchildren, accepted James and Margot's dinner invitations, and smiled through it all as if my heart hadn't been shattered into 1,000 pieces. But beneath the surface I was different, observing, calculating, connecting dots I had willfully ignored for years. It started with small things. The way Margot would sigh dramatically when I mentioned my arthritis. How James would exchange glances with her whenever I forgot a minor detail, as if confirming some private conversation they'd had about my mental capacity. The careful way they avoided discussing any future family events at my house. On New Year's Day, I decided to pay them an unexpected visit. I never dropped by unannounced. It was one of Margot's rules that I had always respectfully followed. But today, with a platter of homemade cinnamon rolls as my excuse, I broke that rule. "Mom!" James looked genuinely startled when he opened the door. "We weren't expecting you." "I thought I'd bring something for your breakfast," I said cheerfully, holding up the platter. "Is this a bad time?" Before he could answer, I heard hurried movements and whispers from the dining room. James's eyes darted nervously in that direction. No, come in," he said, stepping aside. "Margot's just organizing some papers." When I entered the dining room, Margot was hunched over her laptop, frantically closing tabs. Spread across the bureau table were brochures and printouts, which she was hastily gathering into a folder. "Jody!" Her voice was unnaturally high. "What a surprise!" "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," I said, setting down the platter and deliberately looking at the papers she was trying to hide. "Just some work stuff," she said dismissively. But I had already seen enough. One of the brochures clearly displayed golden sunset assisted living across the top. Another document, partially visible, contained what looked like legal language about capacity and guardianship. They weren't just idly contemplating my removal, they were actively planning it, researching facilities, looking into legal options, for taking control of my decisions if I refused. My own son was participating in this betrayal. "Well, don't let me disturb you," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I'll just put these in the kitchen and be on my way." As I turned to leave, I noticed my grandson's artwork on the refrigerator, a crayon drawing of a large house with 4 stick figures in front. The tallest figures were labeled Mommy and Daddy, the smallest me and Liam. Above the house, in a child's uneven scrawl, were the words, "Our new home." The pieces fell into place with brutal clarity. They weren't just planning to move me out. They had already been telling my grandchildren they would be moving into my house that I had paid off 15 years ago. The home where I had raised James, where his father and I had built our life before cancer took him too early. The home I had maintained alone for the past decade, occasionally with financial help from James, that I now realized came with invisible strings attached. "James," I called out, my voice hollow. "When? Were you planning to tell me about moving into my house?" The silence that followed was deafening. James appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face pale. "Mom, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I asked, suddenly tired of the lies. "We were going to talk to you after you had some time to think." About your future, Margot interjected, appearing behind him. You're all alone in that big house. It doesn't make sense. And who decided that? You. Mom, we're concerned about you, James said, adopting the same patronizing tone I'd heard him use with his children. You've been forgetting things. The house is becoming too much for you to manage. Forgetting things? I echoed. You mean like, when I couldn't remember which day we changed your dental appointment last month? That's hardly dementia, James. It's not just that, Margot cut in. You left the stove on that time we visited. You've fallen twice this year. We're worried something worse will happen when no one's around. I stared at them, these strangers wearing the faces of my family. The stove incident was because you called me away to help with Liam's homework while I was cooking. And I fell because your new puppy tripped me, Margot. Are those really the best examples you have of my supposed incompetence? They exchanged glances, and in that moment, I saw the truth. This wasn't about my well-being. This was about my house, my assets, and their impatience to claim them. I think I should go, I said quietly, turning toward the door. Mom, wait. James started. No, I said, finally allowing some of my anger to surface. I think I've waited long enough. I've waited for you to remember that I'm still a person, with dignity, not a problem to be solved. I've waited for you to show me even a fraction of the respect I've always shown you. I'm done waiting. I walked out, my legs somehow carrying me steadily to my car despite the earthquake happening inside me. As I drove home, past the familiar landmarks of the neighborhood where I had lived most of my adult life, I realized with startling clarity that I needed to prepare for war. They thought I was a feeble old woman they could manipulate and discard. They saw me as nothing but an obstacle between them and what they wanted. They had forgotten who I was before I became Grandma Jody, A.T., woman who had survived losing her husband at 45 and gone on to run their household and a small business by herself. A woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. I pulled into my driveway, looking up at the house they were so eager to claim. By the time I reached my front door, I had made my decision. If they wanted to play games, I would show them who the real master was. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about teaching them that underestimating me would be the biggest mistake of their lives. The first person I called wasn't family. It was Eleanor Winters, my oldest, friend and a retired attorney. I'd spent 30 years confiding in her through life's hardest moments. My husband's illness, raising a teenage son alone, navigating widowhood. Now I needed her legal mind more than her shoulder to cry on. They want to do what? Eleanor's voice crackled through the phone, her outrage palpable even from 3 states away where she'd retired. Put me in a home and take my house, I repeated, the words still burning my throat. And from what I saw, they're looking into declaring me incompetent if I refuse. Those ungrateful little... She caught herself. Jody, listen to me. Before you do anything else, you need to document everything. Times, dates, conversations. Get a small recorder for your purse. Georgia is a one-party consent state, so it's perfectly legal. I wrote everything down as she spoke, the attorney and her taking over, mapping out a strategy that made my head spin. Bank accounts to separate. Medical evaluations to undergo. Documented proof of my competence. A new will to draft. And Jody, she said before hanging up, don't let them see you coming. The moment they realize you're fighting back, they'll accelerate their plans. The next morning, I made an appointment with Dr. Collins, my physician of 20 years. Full cognitive assessment? He repeated, looking surprised. Any particular reason, Jody? I hesitated only briefly. My family has expressed concerns. I'd like documentation that I'm fully capable of managing my own affairs. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He'd been a doctor long enough to recognize family dynamics at play. 2 hours later, I left with comprehensive test results confirming what I already knew. I was sharp as a tack, with only the minor memory issues normal for someone my age. My next stop was Meridian Bank, where I'd been a customer since before. James was born. "I'd like to close our joint account," I told the manager, sliding my ID across the desk. The account had been created for emergencies when James's father was sick. I'd never removed James's name, seeing no reason to, until now. "Of course, Mrs. Bradley. Where would you like the funds transferred?" "I'll be opening a new account. At a different bank." By the end of the week, I had moved most of my assets to accounts only I could access, leaving just enough in the original accounts to avoid raising immediate suspicion. I'd spoken with a new attorney Eleanor had recommended, one who specialized in elder law, and I'd begun quietly documenting the subtle manipulations I'd previously dismissed. The way Margot reorganized my medicine cabinet, making it harder for me to find my prescriptions, then pointing out my confusion to James. The sudden frequency of their discussions about my forgetfulness whenever I misplaced something minor. The casual mentions of friends' parents who were so much happier after moving to assisted living. Each incident went into a journal, meticulously dated and described. The picture emerging was clear, a calculated campaign to make me doubt myself and appear increasingly dependent. But outwardly, I played along. I let them think their plan was working. When Margot suggested I was too tired to babysit, I agreed without argument. When James mentioned that managing the house must be becoming difficult, I sighed and said it sometimes felt that way. I even started occasionally pausing mid-sentence, pretending to search for words. "See what I mean?" Margot would whisper to James, thinking I couldn't hear. "It's getting worse." Meanwhile, I was preparing in other ways. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected while focusing on family. I joined a book club and a water aerobics class, building connections outside my increasingly toxic home environment. I hired a financial advisor to help maximize my retirement fund. Most importantly, I began subtly testing the loyalties within my extended family. Over lunch with my sister-in-law Caroline, I casually mentioned that James and Margot seemed concerned about my living situation. "They've been talking about that for months," she said, then froze, realizing her slip. "I mean, it's all right," I said gently. "How long have you known?" Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "Margot approached Robert last Thanksgiving asking if we thought you needed more supervision. When Robert said you seemed perfectly fine, she started listing all these incidents. Falling, forgetting things, leaving appliances on. We were worried, Jody." "And now?" "Now I'm wondering if we've been manipulated," she said, her expression hardening. "Margot mentioned your house would probably be sold soon. She even asked if we might be interested in buying some of your furniture when you downsized." By the time we parted, I had another ally, and more damning evidence of how far James and Margot's plans had progressed. That night, I sat on my back porch, watching fireflies rise from the garden my late husband had planted. The same garden where James had taken his first steps. The home they were so eager to claim had been built with love, filled with memories both beautiful and painful. I had survived losing the love of my life within these walls. I would survive this betrayal too. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Dropping by tomorrow to help with that loose railing. Maybe we can talk about some options for making things easier for you." I smiled at the screen, a calm settling over me. Let them come. Let them think I was willing to discuss their options. Little did they know, I was developing some options of my own. I sent back a simple reply. "That would be lovely, dear. I'll make your favorite coffee cake." The pieces were moving into place. The game was just beginning. And this time, I intended to win. February arrived with unexpected warmth, much like the sudden solicitousness of my son and daughter-in-law. James began stopping by almost daily, fixing things around the house that had functioned perfectly well for years. Margot brought casseroles with reheating instructions written in oversized print, as if I'd suddenly forgotten how to use my own microwave. "Mom, we've been thinking," James said one evening while installing a completely unnecessary grab bar in my shower. "Maybe it's time to consider some options." "Options?" I echoed, feigning confusion. "For the future?" he continued carefully. "This house is so big for just one person. And the stairs." "Oh," I said, making my voice small. "You think I should move?" The relief on his face was palpable. "There are some really nice communities we've looked into, like Golden Sunset. They have activities, medical staff on site, and you wouldn't have to worry about home maintenance anymore." I widened my eyes. "But what about my house? All my things?" "We'd take care of everything," he assured me, patting my hand condescendingly. "You just need to decide what special items you want to keep. The rest we could sell or—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Distribute among the family." I bit my tongue to stop from laughing. He couldn't have been more transparent if he'd tried. "I don't know, James," I said, letting my voice waver. "This is all so sudden." "Just think about it, Mom. No rush." His tone suggested otherwise. "By the way, where do you keep your important papers? We should probably organize those too." I almost admired his effort to locate my will and financial documents. Almost. "I think they're in the study somewhere," I said vaguely. "I'll look for them." That night, I called Eleanor with an update. "They're accelerating their timeline," I told her. "James asked about my papers today." "Perfect," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "That means they'll jump at the bait." The bait was a masterstroke of Eleanor's devising. False trail leading them to believe I possessed much more than they knew about. Property in Florida I'd supposedly inherited from a cousin, investments they weren't aware of, and a substantial insurance policy. All fictional, but meticulously crafted to appear legitimate. I'd accidentally left bank statements showing transfers to accounts they couldn't access, and brochures for retirement communities in Florida, marked with notes like, "Possible winter. Home?" If they were going to assume I was incompetent, I might as well use that assumption against them. 2 weeks later, the trap was set. I'd complained increasingly about forgetfulness, even calling James in manufactured distress one evening because I couldn't remember where I'd parked at the grocery store. I'd left medication doses accidentally skipped and kept mentioning the name of my financial advisor, actually Eleanor's son, who was in on our plan. Then I made the call I knew would spring the trap. "James," I said, my voice deliberately fragile, "I've been thinking about what you said, about the house being too much. Maybe you're right. The speed with which he and Margot appeared at my door would have been touching if I hadn't understood their true motives." "I've decided I should get my affairs in order," I told them, seated at my kitchen table where we'd shared so many family meals, "before I make any big changes." Margot smiled with barely concealed triumph. "That's very responsible, Jody." "I've gathered all my important papers," I continued, gesturing to a folder on the table. "My will, bank information, insurance policies." I thought we could go through them together. James practically lunged for the folder. "That's a great idea, Mom." I watched their expressions shift as they paged through the documents I'd carefully prepared. Confusion, then shock, then poorly disguised calculation as they realized the extent of what they thought was my hidden wealth. "Mom," James said slowly, "I had no idea about the Florida property or these investment accounts." "Oh, that," I said dismissively. "Cousin Martha left me her condo years ago. I never mentioned it because I rarely use it, and the investments were your father's idea. They've done quite well." Margot was practically salivating. "And you've been managing all this yourself?" "Well, Richard helps me," I said, referring to Eleanor's son. "He's such a dear, always looking out for my best interests." Their eyes met briefly, a look I'd come to recognize. They were recalculating, Their approach. The stakes had just gotten much higher. "Mom," James said, his voice suddenly gentle, "this is a lot for you to handle alone. Maybe we should meet with Richard together. Make sure everything's properly set up for your future care." "That's a wonderful idea," I agreed enthusiastically. "He's coming next week to help me update my will. I'll tell him you'll be joining us." As they left, I heard them whispering furiously in the driveway. Phase 1 was complete. They'd taken the bait. Now it was time for Phase 2. I made 2 calls that evening. The first to Eleanor. "They're all in," I told her. "Completely convinced." "Excellent," she replied. "Is Richard still coming on Thursday?" "Right on schedule, and I've asked my new friends to drop by as well." My new friends were actually a retired judge, a geriatric specialist from my doctor's office, and Caroline, who had been horrified to learn the full extent of James and Margot's manipulations. They would arrive shortly after James and Margot, providing the impartial witnesses we needed. My second call was to a locksmith to change every lock in the house. If James and Margot tried to search for those fictional assets before our meeting, they'd find themselves unexpectedly locked out. That night, I slept better than I had in months. For so long, I'd been the one feeling trapped by their expectations, their machinations, their thinly veiled contempt. But now the tables had turned. I wasn't just fighting back, I was writing an entirely new ending to this story. As I drifted off to sleep, I found myself actually looking forward to the confrontation, to come. Let them think they had me cornered. Let them believe I was a helpless old woman they could manipulate at will. Their underestimation of me would be their downfall. The trap was set, the players were in position, and I was finally ready to show my hand. Thursday arrived with the quiet anticipation of a gathering storm. I spent the morning preparing, setting out coffee and cookies in the living room, checking my recording device one last time, arranging the documents Eleanor and I had meticulously prepared. Everything had to be perfect. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. James and Margot stood on my porch, both dressed as if attending a business meeting. James in a blazer he rarely wore, Margot in a tailored dress, her smile stretched. Too wide. "Mom, you look wonderful," James said, kissing my cheek. His eyes darted past me, scanning the living room. "Is Richard here yet?" "He'll be along shortly," I assured him, gesturing toward the seating area. "I thought we could chat first." Margot immediately took charge, pulling out a folder of her own. "We've brought some information about Golden Sunset," she said, spreading glossy brochures across my coffee table. "They have an opening in their premium wing. We've already put down a deposit to hold it." I raised my eyebrows, feigning surprise. "A deposit? That's very generous, but—" "It's refundable," James interjected hastily. "We just didn't want to miss the opportunity. The waiting list is usually 6 months." "How thoughtful," I murmured, watching them exchange glances. Margot leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Jody, we've been talking with Dr. Mercer. You remember him from the Christmas party? He specializes in geriatric care, and he thinks this transition would be best done quickly once you've decided." I nodded, making a mental note of this fabricated medical advice. "And what about my house? My belongings?" "We'd handle everything," James said too quickly. "You wouldn't need to worry about a thing." "And the Florida property?" I asked innocently. "Would you manage that too?" Their eyes lit up. "Absolutely," Margot assured me. "We could look after all your properties and investments." The doorbell rang again. "That must be Richard," I said, rising to answer it. It wasn't Richard. It was Dr. Collins, my actual physician, followed by Judge Wilson, Caroline, and Eleanor. Their timing was impeccable. "What's this?" James asked, his voice suddenly sharp as the group entered my living room. "A few friends joining our discussion," I explained calmly. "I hope you don't mind." The confusion on their faces quickly turned to wariness as everyone settled into seats. Richard arrived moments later, carrying a briefcase and a professional demeanor that made James and Margot shift. Uncomfortably, "Now that everyone's here," I began, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "I'd like to clarify a few things." I turned to Dr. Collins. "Doctor, would you mind sharing the results of my recent cognitive assessment?" He nodded, pulling out a folder. "Mrs. Bradley is in excellent cognitive health for her age. There are no indications of dementia or any condition that would impair her decision-making capacity." Margot's face flushed. "With all due respect, doctor, we've noticed concerning behaviors at home." "Like what?" I interrupted, my voice ice-cold. "Forgetting where I parked that one time, when you had actually moved my car to help me? Or leaving the stove on, after you called me away while I was cooking. Or perhaps you mean the medications I've been forgetting to take, which are actually optional supplements you rearranged in my cabinet?" James paled. "Mom, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I heard you and Margot at Christmas planning to put me in a nursing home so you could take my house. I'm saying I've documented months of your attempts to make me appear incompetent. And I'm saying it stops today." The silence that followed was deafening. Margot recovered first, her expression hardening. "This is ridiculous. You're clearly confused and paranoid. This just proves our point." "Actually," Eleanor interjected, "Jody has recordings of your conversations. Legal in this state, by the way. She also has witnesses to your attempts to manipulate her medical care and financial decisions." Judge Wilson nodded gravely. "If what I've heard is accurate, this could constitute elder abuse, which I take very seriously." James looked stricken, his facade crumbling. "Mom, there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I said firmly. "You've been planning this for months, and if I hadn't caught you, you would have followed through." I turned to Richard, who had remained professionally neutral throughout the exchange. "Would you please explain the changes to my estate planning?" Richard opened his briefcase, extracting a document. "Mrs. Bradley has made several amendments to her will and established a trust for her assets. The house will be placed in an irrevocable trust with terms that prevent it from being sold during her lifetime. She has also designated new medical and financial powers of attorney." "New?" Margot whispered, her voice suddenly small. "Yes," I confirmed. "Neither of you will have any legal authority over my care or my property. Ever." "But the Florida condo," James began, desperation creeping into his voice. "The investment accounts," I laughed, genuinely amused for the first time in months. "There is no Florida condo, James. No secret investments. That was bait to expose your true intentions. And you took it. Hook, line, and sinker." The color drained from their faces as understanding dawned. Caroline, who had witnessed their manipulations firsthand, shook her head in disgust. "You would have put your own mother in a home against her will," she said to James, her voice thick with disappointment. "For a house. How could you?" James turned. To me, eyes suddenly brimming with tears. "Mom, please. We were just worried about you. We wanted to make sure you were taken care of." "Save it," I said, raising my hand. "I've heard enough lies to last a lifetime. I'm not cutting you out of my life. You're still my son, and I still love you. But things will be different now. There will be boundaries. There will be consequences." I stood, feeling taller and stronger than I had in years. "Now, I think this meeting is over. I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk again." As they left, shoulders slumped in defeat, I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame. Real, genuine shame on James's face as he paused at the door. "Mom, he started, then stopped, words failing him. "Go home, James," I said quietly. "Think about who you've become, and decide who you want to be." The door closed behind them, and for the first time in months, I breathed freely in my own home. 6 months can change everything. As summer faded into autumn, the trees in my backyard blazed with color, a fitting metaphor for the transformation in my own life. After the confrontation, James and Margot retreated into stunned silence. No calls, no visits, not even messages about the grandchildren. I expected to feel the ache of their absence more keenly, but instead, I found myself embracing the peace their distance provided. Caroline stepped in, bringing my grandchildren for weekend visits, ensuring they understood that Grandma's house was still a safe place filled with love. "They miss you," she told me during one such visit. "Especially James. He's not the same." I nodded, neither accepting nor rejecting this information. "He needs to find his own way back," I said simply. My new life began taking shape in unexpected ways. The book club I'd joined as part of my cover became a genuine source of joy. Twice weekly water aerobics classes strengthened not just my body but my circle of friends, women my age with their own stories of rebuilding after loss, betrayal, or major life changes. "You should see the look on your face these days," Eleanor commented during one of her visits. "You're glowing," I smiled, knowing she was right. Freedom looks good on me. Freedom meant redecorating the living room in colors Margot had always dismissed as too bright. It meant converting James's old bedroom into an art studio where I rediscovered my passion for painting. It meant traveling to the coast for a week with my new friends, something I'd never have done when I was arranging my life around my family's expectations. The first sign of change came 3 months after the confrontation, a handwritten letter from James. No excuses, no justifications, just a simple acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a request. "When you're ready, I'd like to talk." I waited another month before responding, using the time to consult with Eleanor and my therapist, another positive change I'd made. When I finally called him, I suggested meeting on neutral ground, a coffee shop downtown. He arrived early, aged somehow, nervousness evident in his fidgeting hands. "Mom," he began, then stopped, gathering himself. "I don't know where to start." "How about the truth?" I suggested gently. "That's always a good place." He nodded, eyes downcast. "The truth is, I got lost somewhere along the way. Margot and we've been struggling financially. The business isn't doing well, and we're underwater on the house. When she started talking about how much easier things would be if we had your place, it seemed like a solution that required erasing my autonomy," I pointed out. "Yes," he admitted, his voice breaking. "It was wrong. So wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, Mom. I just wanted you to know I see what I did now, what I almost became." "And Margot?" A shadow crossed his face. "We're separated. Have been for 2 months now. After everything came out, I started seeing other patterns, ways she manipulated not just you, but me, the kids, everyone." I reached across the table and took his hand, surprised by my own compassion. "I'm sorry for that part of it, James." "Don't be," he said firmly. "It needed to happen. I needed to wake up." We talked for nearly 3 hours that day, peeling back layers of misunderstanding and hurt. He cried when I described how it felt to hear them plotting against me at Christmas. I cried when he shared how thoroughly he'd been convinced that I was declining, a narrative Margot had carefully constructed over years. "I'd like to earn back your trust," he said as we parted. "However long it takes, it will take time," I told him honestly. But we have that now. The reconstruction of our relationship began slowly. Sunday dinners, just the two of us. Occasional outings with the grandchildren. Each interaction carefully bounded by the new rules I'd established: respect for my decisions, honesty in all communications, no assumptions about my capabilities. I maintained my independence fiercely. When James offered to help with house repairs, I accepted only when I truly needed assistance, not as a default. When he suggested family gatherings, I evaluated each invitation on its own merits, rather than automatically saying yes. The new balance felt right, loving but not self-sacrificing, connected but not enmeshed. On a crisp October evening, exactly 6 months after the confrontation, I hosted a dinner party. Around my table sat my reconstructed family: James, solo; Caroline and her husband; my grandchildren; Eleanor and her son Richard; and several friends from my book club and water aerobics class. As I carried the dessert to the table, a homemade apple pie from fruit grown in my own garden, I paused, taking in the scene. Laughter filled the room that had once been heavy with manipulation and deceit. My home was truly mine again, not a prize to be claimed, but a sanctuary I chose to share. With those who respected my worth? "Everything okay, Mom?" James asked, noticing my momentary stillness. I smiled, feeling the weight of the past year, the hurt, the betrayal, the fight, and finally, the healing. "Everything is exactly as it should be," I replied. Later, as the guests departed and James helped with the last of the dishes, he asked the question I'd been expecting. "Do you think you'll ever fully trust me again?" I considered this carefully, respecting both of us enough to be honest. "I trust the person you're becoming," I said finally. "The man who's doing the hard work of rebuilding himself. That's enough for now." He nodded, accepting this limited but genuine offering. After he left, I walked through my quiet house, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs that told the story of my life. This home had witnessed my greatest joys and deepest sorrows. It had almost become the center of an ugly battle that might have destroyed what remained of my family. Instead, it had become the stage for an unexpected redemption, not just for James, but for me. I had discovered strength I'd forgotten I possessed. I'd built connections beyond the narrow circle of family. I'd learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to demand respect, to rewrite the story others try to impose upon you. As I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror. There were the same lines, the same gray hair, the same aging body that Margot and James had once seen as evidence of decline. But now I saw what they had missed. The wisdom in those lines, the dignity in that silver, the resilience in that body that had carried me through 70 years of life. I smiled at my reflection, making a silent promise to the woman looking back at me. I will never again allow anyone to make me believe I am less than I am. The unexpected inheritance of this difficult year hadn't been property or money or possessions. It had been the reclamation of myself, whole, worthy, and finally, genuinely free.